Greg LoPiccolo.
This is another segment of the Looking Glass podcast where we interview people who used to work for Looking Glass and hear their stories about their work and what they did, how they contributed to the games. And today we have Greg LoPiccolo, who is, what is your exact job title at Harmonix? I know it's been changing a few times.
Vice President of Product Development.
Oh, wow. Okay. And at what years did you work at Looking Glass?
I started as a contractor in 1993, and then came on full-time, I think, in 94, and I was there until December 98.
Okay.
When I left and moved to Harmonix.
Okay. And so I guess we can just start with just a little bit about what you did beforehand, how you got into the company, and what your first project was.
So I was playing bass in a band called Tribe that was sort of a Boston rock band in the late 80s, early 90s. And a friend of mine, a guy named Rex Bradford, who you should also have on your podcast, I think.
Okay.
We were friends, and he invited me to... I had done music on a Sega Genesis title that he had done.
Oh, wow.
Bimini Run. And
what was it called?
It was called Bimini Run.
Bimini?
Bimini, yes.
Okay.
It was a sort of a spy speedboat game. It's super obscure.
Okay.
And he had reached out to me to do music for that, so I had kind of that was the only thing I had ever done. And then anyway, I came to visit him at Looking Glass, and during the visit I met Doug Church and Dan Schmidt, who were familiar with my band. And so we were just talking, and I think it just came up in conversation. They sort of wondered, well, would you ever be willing to do any game music? And I was doing the band full time for very little money, so I was sort of actively looking for freelance opportunities. And so I said sure, and so they brought me on as a contractor, and I started writing scores for System Shock, which was in pre-production at that point. They were just kicking it off.
Okay. So was there concept art at that point? Was there a build at that point, or is it that kind of hazy?
I don't remember much. Well, I remember being in meetings with Doug and Austin and I think Tim, and Dan, trying to figure out what was the storyline and how it was going to work and so forth. But I was since I was a contractor, I was a little peripheral to the core. I wasn't really, I was like the music guy.
But you were in those meetings, it doesn't, or a few of them.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Did they have because one of the themes of this podcast I've called "Looking for Authorship." So I'm kind of interested in one of the things that strikes me about a lot of the Looking Glass games is how they felt, to me at least, very kind of artistically coherent. Like there was a strong vision holder behind them. But my understanding is that they were an interesting confluence of different people working artistically, kind of in their own way, that happened to meld together really well. And so I'm kind of curious as to what kind of, in terms of the way that your music contributed to the feeling of the game, how directed that was, how free you were. Did they just say, "Hey, write us some music," and you were like, "Cyberpunk, okay," or was it, or what? How?
It was. Well, it's funny because my I have very clear recollection of a few aspects of it, and no recollection whatsoever about lots of other aspects of it.
Okay.
I remember. Well, a big issue was I don't remember how this came to pass, but it emerged that they were interested in an interactive score, sort of pushing the envelope, because that was very early days for those kind of things. And we... So
something that would change depending on your actions or something.
So there was a lot of tight collaboration between me and Doug and Rob Fermier, who's now at Robot. He was an ensemble. He's another guy. You should totally have a new
I'm every time I interview a new person, I get more names. So I'm looking for more people.
And that might have been his first title for them, so he got the job of writing the interactive scoring module, which was pretty sophisticated, and I had never written any game music or anything, but we came up with this whole scheme where it had to be kind of musically coherent, so themes could unfold over time, but on sort of 4-bar boundaries, it could kind of pulled the game state and adjust its intensity level, and so all the music was written at 3 different intensity levels. So if you're walking along, it would play the kind of quiescent level, and then I think if monsters were within a specific radius, then it would go up to the kind of like the peril level, and then if you were actually like taking fire, then it would be sort of the combat level.
That's actually interesting. So, and I imagine this would be a hard thing to remember, but whether or not that happened, even if you couldn't see them, like if we're in a radius, but they're on the other side of a wall, it's almost like if the music changed, it would sort of be anticipating, something without kind of the music is telling you. It's not just reflecting something you already know.
I don't remember the specifics.
Yeah.
I'll bet there's other people you could talk
probably
to.
Other people I could talk to
who could say exactly what it was that triggered it. We took a lot of tuning, but it ended up working pretty well.
Yeah.
So you'd be cruising along, and it would kind of dial up appropriately. And then if you won any specific battle, and for some of the themes, there was like a little kind of resolution bit that would play. On the next bit, would cue it up on the next 4-bar boundary after you had, after the battle was over.
That's really interesting, because one of the things we've talked about with System Shock is that it's obviously, by today's standards at least, a very open game. It's like a revision of that template that was in Underworld 1, which was and one of the themes we've talked about with some other people in the podcast is how a lot of Looking Glass games were kind of almost like simulations first at the conceptual stage before they kind of became games. It was kind of like, let's try to take this world and just like figure out how to just like make it function in an interesting way. And
yes,
and it's kind of so Citadel Station is very much it's almost just like, hey, here's a space station, and you get to run around. There's enemies and stuff like that. So I imagine the dynamic music was maybe part of that whole philosophy.
No, it was very thematically tied to that, because I remember they were coming off of what I think they had considered like design successes in Underworld 1 and 2, where these like fairly complex stories would sort of unfold emergently, where they had these like game anecdotes, where like somebody would be being chased and they'd get away and they'd fall down a hole, and like all these like relatively complex, rich, detailed stories that just emerged from the the interaction of a few simple systems.
Yeah.
And so they were clearly bought into that approach, and then wanted to take it to the next level
with the music. And they were
having the music. There was a scoring system built into Underworld, but I don't remember what it was all about. I know that this was like I think a pretty big evolutionary step.
Yeah, my memory of Underworld, and we did talk about the music some with Dan. I think though it was a little bit more like track switching. I think there was some maybe like some aspect of the music would like fade in or out or switch or something like that. But what you're talking, it's kind of funny that I love System Shock. I played it many times, but I don't even have a really strong memory of like any obvious switch points in the music where because in Underworld it's really easy to tell when the music shifts gears.
Yeah.
And in System Shock it's really hard to tell when the music shifts gears. It feels more like this fluid.
Yeah. We came up with this whole system. I think actually worked relatively well, because it would be these 4-bar blocks, and then like melodies kind of composed on top of them, then they'd be chopped up so that at any given time, and so there was like multiple parts that would work. It was like this matrix, right, of like stuff that would work horizontally and vertically. So that the splice points were fairly well camouflaged. But it could dynamically kind of like dial itself up and down.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. It's making me, and I'm sure, I don't know if you think there's a connection here, but that makes me think of like frequency. With the way you have these tracks that you're kind of putting stuff together, or not, maybe that's too tenuous a connection.
That was more. Well, no, I'm thinking about that. It's more driven out of like that was more music centric. Like here's a song, okay, and I'll let's kind of lay the song out. To me, it was like going into it like thematically, it was for me a microcosm of how Looking Glass was at that point. Because there was this like incredible sense of possibility, where like nobody was experienced enough to know what couldn't be done, and so people would just posit all this and they were again, I was at that point very very much on the creative periphery. Like I was just being contracted to do this one thing, but
would that also have to do with the industry too? When you say like we, do you mean just like the people there, or yourself as somebody who was coming in to the industry at that point? Because it was also like the early days of 3D games.
I would say both. Right. Like the sort of people doing sound and music for games. It was very much like everyone was kind of working on their first game or their second game. Like there was not. it's interesting to reflect back on it, like because it was super guerrilla, right? I had like a Mac with an digitized audio vision card. What ended up turning into Pro Tools like 30 years later, or 20 years later, whatever. It was a 4-track card. I remember going to the garage to fix my car, and with a portable recorder and a mic, saying, okay, I need sounds, and getting like power drill sounds, and having my mechanic like bang on stuff, hit things with wrenches and so forth, just to get the raw material to turn into all the sound effects that ended up, being in System Shock.
That's actually really interesting because you didn't just do the music, right? You did the sound design.
First I did the music, and then they needed sound effects. And there was it kind of went in 2 stages, because the first version of System Shock was floppies. And so there was no room for speech. Like there was like a line item, because all the music was MIDI, and that was a whole like nightmare of well, I'll come back to that. But so there was a like finite set of gunshots and just basically like one-shot sound effects that for the game, and then for the CD version. That was the point at which we had enough storage space to do speech, and so then we went back, and there was all these. And now I don't remember this. What I'm guessing is true, but I don't know is true. Is like all those speeches were probably text in.
Oh, they are
floppy version.
Yeah, they are. Okay. Yeah, they definitely. I know because I've actually played. I haven't played through it, but I've played enough of the floppy version. Yeah, it's basically.
So then it was my job to go around and recruit. Through the company, like all these people to play the parts of these things, and then I had to take them back, to my little, my little ghetto setup, and put in ambient beds and turn them into these little audio vignettes where like, oh, we're trapped in the, with whatever, the infirmary, and the mutants are trying to break in, and all this. So
like
building
zombie Last Stand kind of kind of dialogue, and
right, which persisted all the way through like Shock 2 that Irrational did and so forth. But
even in BioShock too. That's what BioShock is all about as well. So.
But that was all from the ground up. It's like, okay, we have whatever it was like 100 something little vignettes, and each one, and then a lot of work went into the Shodan sound design.
That's actually that's of course really interesting as well, because it's not just recording a voice. Isn't there a lot of distortion and a lot of post on that voice to create the Shodan sound? Yeah,
and it was all laboriously hand done. Because now you can just get plugins that just like all that stuff is like free. But at that point it was like me. All I had was Sound Designer, which was just like an audio editor where you can cut and paste.
Oh, okay.
And there was like EQ, and you could pitch shift. And so it was just me, just like trying, because there was a progression where the first time you meet Shodan. And we got Terry Brocious, who had been in Tribe with me. She was the keyboard player in Tribe.
Oh, okay.
And so she was like, and had this sort of voice that seemed like it would lend itself, and then she could just kill. And a creative sensibility that I thought would be receptive to the concept of sort of like the evil Shodan. And sure enough, like
well, I mean, there's a reason why a lot of people regard that character as a great game villain, right, in the history of.
Well, it was really well written. The writing was great, and then.
Well, who wrote it?
I'm pretty sure it was Austin.
Was it Austin?
I assumed that it was Austin.
Okay, because we talked to Austin. Austin talked a lot about pre-production, but he didn't talk about like dialogue. Which maybe he did.
I think it was Austin. I mean, other people could tell you better than me. But
okay, cool. Yeah.
So it was a great character, like great written parts. And then she performed them like really well. She really got into the character. And then there was this whole arc where when you first, there's a couple of kind of like more lengthy monologues at the beginning where it's pretty much together, but then there's a few glitches. Where it was like this idea that like as it proceeds through the game, I needed to add more and more processing. So at the end, like she's completely out of her mind, and like sort of collapsing as an entity.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I remember the first thing you hear of Shodan in the game is actually like a canned greeting. It's Shodan saying, "Welcome back to Citadel Station. I hope your healing process went well and everything." And it's like an official. It's like she's nice there. It's like an official greeting, but then there's those glitches like you were talking about.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like a lot of people have forgotten that about the character, sort of like that's not the image people have. It was almost kind of like GLaDOS in Portal at the beginning, but then there's like this erosion over the course of the game, which you're saying was a very intentional part of the character.
Yeah, and then the sound design was intended to match that, where basically her speech processing facilities would degrade, as you proceeded through the game. Which is one of these things that I signed up for, and then had no idea of how much work it would actually be. Whereas it was like late nights, just minutely chopping up these little tiny bits.
Because she doesn't have a huge amount of dialogue, right? I mean, it's not like pages and pages of text, is it? Or
no, it wasn't.
But it's like short snippets that needed a lot of work.
Yes, exactly. Well, like what I discovered is to get the effect, like the really cool effect, which was kind of ripped off from, I think it was Max Headroom. Did a lot of this, which was sort of like
or it was almost jitter or something, or kind of repeat itself a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Where you'd have or say occasionally something like the pitch would spiral up, like she did like fixed on some word and they would go up, But that would be like, okay, you'd paste a bunch and then you'd individually pitch shift each one. There might have been smarter ways to do it even back then, but I didn't know them. Right, all I had to do was a little simple tool and time.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, it was fun.
That sounds really cool, because you're right. Actually, that's an interesting insight, because I personally had never thought about at the time how hard it would have been to do those kinds of effects. Because now, of course, you hear that now. Like if you play that game years after the fact.
Yeah, now you press a button.
Like now you just be like, oh, how do they clearly just recorded somebody, and then 45 minutes later they had the final Shodan voice, right? Whereas
no, it was like stone axes.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting.
I kind of have to ask. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You
sound geek in me.
You can go ahead. Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm curious, because it's something that I talk about, especially with people who are learning sound design for the first time. Were you experimenting with it and then you landed on something that you liked, or were you thinking about how to design the voice and then trying to apply principles to match an intended design, right? Because I think sometimes there's this idea that you can just tinker and then you'll come up with something, and sometimes that works, but I think a lot of times, like you were saying, you were looking at Max Headroom, or the kind of de-evolution of her voice sounds like it was planned. I mean, do you remember if it was sort of a planned approach to get where you were? Or? I
remember having a pretty clear conception, which might have been arrived at in collaboration with the other folks. I'm sure we talked about it, about this idea, just that idea, which has now been sort of done to death. So I think it's very much in kind of the the science fiction consciousness of if you go back to 2001 is probably the first manifestation where they're like, no, it actually they do it in 2001, right? It's
at the end when his voice is just starting
out and the voice is
out.
falling apart, right? So that was read the original kind of, I think, so there was prior stuff, and I think the idea for the sound design and System Shock was that it was going to be more sort of cybery and edgy and fast paced, whereas like 2001 is very stately, and it's got that kind of arc, but this was going to be more kind of glitchy, and so I remember having something pretty clear in my head, and then discovering to my dismay that to get that, like it was doable, but it was about 10 times more work than I realized it was going to be.
But you did it.
Yep.
Well, and the results were fantastic. It's an iconic character.
I was really proud of it. I think we all were. Like the writing and the performance and everything came together.
Well, one of the things, going back to the simulation design aspect, one of the things that Austin and I talked about was the final, talking about the writing and the voice performance and the sound design and everything. The kind of final piece of the puzzle for why that's a great character and a great game, I think, is that Shodan's such a perfect metaphor for the game designer, in a way that that world is full of all these unfair challenges that she's constantly creating, and so in a normal game where you're like, oh, I see what's happening here, the game designer just hates me, right? And the thing that Austin said is, well, yeah, but Shodan has designed your environment, and Shodan does hate you, so like all the horrible things we want to do to the player have this like perfect metaphor, like rationalized within the fiction of the game. So that game has like a really powerful feeling of kind of the player squaring off with, in metaphor, the game designers, but in the fiction, but instead of disrupting the fiction, that actually reinforces the fiction in that game, and that's part of the reason that character comes off so well. Like when just, Shodan's like, I shut off this door, and then just like, you know what I mean? Right, and then you're just like, what? Oh God, and then you're like, you have to do something else, but that's not taking you out of the game. All you're thinking is, God damn it, Shodan, and the game does such a phenomenal job of creating that coherence. It's one of the reasons I believe it's kind of to me remains a great game, and I think a lot of the games, even stuff like System Shock 2 and Bioshock, which are good games that came after it, for me, don't have quite that level of like experimental kind of, incredible coherence on the part of the game world as a simulator. That's just my personal thing.
Well, it's interesting because I would love to play it again now.
Oh, you can't. Somebody did a mouse look mod for it. Actually, not that necessarily improves it, but it's interesting. There's a fan community. There's like this high-res mod for it.
Let's come back to this. I don't want to burn valuable podcast time on it, but I would very much like to check it out.
Yeah, you should. I'll give you the link for where you can find it.
Great. Okay.
So I'm sure we could talk about System Shock all day, just because it's a really interesting game. I wanted to move on to some of your other stuff, but before we leave System Shock, I just had one thing I wanted to ask. The music itself in System Shock is not like the kind of music you would expect to find in like a sort of horror science fiction kind of game.
It's not?
What I mean is that if you compare it to like stuff like System Shock 2 or the games that came after it, maybe it just has to do with that's like post like Resident Evil, and there's more of like and I love the music, so let's just get that out of the way. It's more just kind of like there's something like really kind of peppy and fast moving about the music, at least in the first level, and I hope when we do the final podcast we can maybe put a clip in, but I don't know if I wonder if you talk a little bit about like what your inspiration or thinking was for like the music design itself. It's kind of like the music, I think towards the end of the game gets a little bit more like kind of scary and atmospheric and when you get near to the climax. But I remember like the first level music, like you're in this place where like there's endless bloody dead bodies and everybody's dead, and it's like this horrible kind of like Night of the Living Dead horror situation on a space station, but the music's like you know what I mean? And I'm wondering if that was like, was that part of, your intent, or because that music creates a very deliberate mood?
Well, so, it was kind of a blank slate, because certainly the team was like, go write the music, and then there were a few levels that clearly need for which there was like kind of more of a stylistic template, like cyberspace. Okay, that needed to sound like very kind of cyberspacey, kind
of floaty and ethereal, kind of.
And electro, like I don't even know if it makes any sense to say this, but more overtly electronic in nature. It was all, obviously electronic. And then I remember the reactor level was sort of ponderous and weighty. And then I think maybe the Residence or one of the other ones was more contemplative and quiet. So there's a few that had a theme that made sense, and other than that, it's like we need to crank out a lot of music, and I would sit there and just try to come up with ideas, and at some point everyone was like, okay, put it in the game, that will have to do, like any creative project, you run out of time and you go with what you have. A lot of it, frankly, was bound up in just the technical challenges of getting it to work in the game, because at that point, like PC audio was this like
you were mentioning MIDI before and how that was a nightmare.
Well, because I was composing on this Roland box, the General MIDI box, and so which you could actually, I think you could get it as a game card, and that was like the reference standard, like the best audio that was the stuff that you played on the card that the music was composed on. But then I had to do a custom set of samples for the Gravis Ultrasound, which was this card that actually had some tiny amount of memory, and you could load stuff onto the card. And so I had to like roll my own samples for the Gravis Ultrasound.
And I remember all those cards. I never had them. I only had a Sound Blaster, but I remember every time you chose the configuration of the game, you'd always see Gravis Ultrasound,
which was
MT32 or something.
It had just enough market share, so like if you were going to do like a AAA,
you had to support it.
You kind of had to, or or we decided to in any case. And then the baseline was
all Origin games did. I remember.
Yeah, well, we were sort of an origin game.
Yeah.
At whatever point, I think it came down. It's like, oh, we should do this, and it was a lot of work, because you had to we had to build, all the instrumental samples for, out of scratch for the Gravis ultrasound. Yeah. Then the bass line was, they still, the creative labs.
Yeah, the Sound Blaster.
The Sound Blaster, exactly. Yeah. Which was this little Yamaha chip. It was brutal, right? It had a square wave and a triangle wave and a very finite number of voices, and so all the score parts had to work on that. Yeah. And so I did do the kind of 3 sound design passes.
Wow.
It was crazy. So a lot of it was really a lot of trying to figure out how to use this tiny palette to squeeze as much kind of polish out of it as possible. So getting delay effects where, it was like you play the MIDI note and then you play it at a lower velocity and at a lower velocity, just, and pan it.
Yeah.
There was with 2 things I could do. I could pan things and I could, adjust their volume and so it was a question of trying to get a lot of different sounds out of this tiny palette.
Cool. Well, you certainly did. I was playing the game recently a few years ago, and I think when the Mouse Look mod came out, my girlfriend was like, I really like the music in that game, although I feel like I shouldn't because I've heard it so many times, but it really doesn't get boring. That was her big endorsement of it, is that she could listen to it for hours.
That's flattering. One of the things that's happened to me, so there were a couple of songs, so there was these, compositions, but they were really only realized with these MIDI, various kinds of MIDI devices. And then a few years later, I did remixes of a couple with actual, at a studio with actual synthesizers and effects and so forth. Full-on audio productions, which were kind of cool.
Just for yourself, or for?
I think just for my.
Are those available somewhere?
Yeah.
Oh, online or something? Or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh wow, cool.
I can send you a link.
Yeah.
I think they're. I'd have to go look. I think they might be on the Tribe fan site.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because there's little sections for each of us.
We should put that URL on the end of this podcast.
Okay, yeah, but there's a couple of them.
Yeah.
And then there's a guy in Brazil who stumbled into them and has been hitting me up for the original MIDI tracks to remix them. There's a tiny community of people who actually still remember that music, which I find
you couldn't
amazing.
Play the game without remembering the music. I mean, it was for anybody who played the game, and I know the game has a cult following, but for me, I remember that music like I remember the Mario music.
It's funny because for me it was like a gig. I did it, and I haven't looked back. Right, I've listened to it since, and it's just this thing that happened a really long time ago.
Yeah. No, so moving on. I know that then you were hired full time, and then you eventually. I would like to talk about Thief, but I'm wondering if there's something sort of in between. Because I know that you were the project lead on Thief. Is that it?
I ended up as the project lead on Thief.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now, did you do some other sound stuff in between that, kind of moving up to that point?
Yeah. So I was originally just composing music. Then they needed sound effects, and so I took that on. Mm-hmm. And then they needed speech recording and editing, so I took that on.
And that's all in System Shock?
That's all in System Shock. Okay. And then Terra Nova was entering development at that point, and it was too much work for me. So then I reached out to Eric Brocious, and I said, actually Eric and Terry, I think, I said, there's work here, and if you'd like it, then we can set you up. So then they started freelancing, doing Terra Nova music. Mm-hmm. And then we got into the situation where we needed, so Terra Nova this was right after Wing Commander 3 had been successful with all these movies.
So you needed full motion video. Dan talked about this.
Yeah, there was this mandate from above, it's an origin game, it should be in the guise of, our version of Wing Commander.
The Wing Commander, yeah.
And so there was this whole pretty profoundly dysfunctional process where we wrote this elaborate script and hired people and tried to record it. It was a huge, and then we threw it all out and started over. And at which point we had an AV department. So I became
in-house.
Yeah, I think because Eric came on full time, and Josh Randall came on full time. He had been who's now the creative director here at Harmonix. He had been a tester on Flight, and they came to me and said, he's not the best tester, but he's got other skills. And so we brought him in, and so then we developed this department where we hired a screenwriter and did a script and hired a director, and we did a green screen shoot in Boston.
Oh, so that was shot in Boston?
It was shot in Boston at this production thing in Brighton, where they have a green screen rig. And then
this was at what year? This
was
like 95?
95, yeah. And so we had Macs, like the most stoked Macs you could buy with these like video capture cards in them. So we had like Beta SP, like being digitized, and then the art team, which was headed up by Rich Sullivan, did these like 3D backdrops in 3ds Max, and then we composited these characters in.
Now you were involved. What was your job in this whole process? Was it organizing all this?
I was the AV director, and I was sort of producing these. Yeah, okay. I essentially produced these segments. And so the compositing was done by my wife Gail, who worked at Looking Glass at the time, and then went on to be the lead artist on the golf game that they did. So she was sort of the lead compositor, and Josh was compositing, and Eric was doing the sound, the score and all the sound design. And we had this little, guerrilla, video post-production thing. It was crazy. Wow. It was like super bleeding edge. Where like everything was crashing all the time, and we just trying to figure out. But it came out okay, Like creatively, I don't know, it was what it was. But so that consumed a lot of time, and then was it because of your more managerial role that it sort of prepared you for being more the project lead? And I guess so. It wasn't particularly organized or thought through. It was, really, with the benefit of hindsight, it was just like holes would open up and people who were available would fill them. So we had a creative director that had been brought in by the new management, and then he left, and so they made me the creative director, and that lasted for, I don't know, a couple of months maybe. And then Dan, who had been, like Terra Nova had shipped, and then Dan was project lead on Thief, and then he went to Harmonix. And they basically turned to me and said, "Would you like to be the project director of Thief?" And I was like, "Okay," which was a little scary, because you had all these titans, Tim Stelmach and Doug, and it was a fairly powerful team, and they had all been there. Like I was still, like, at least from my perspective, relatively new. I was like the new guy, right? Because I came, because they were already like fully rocking by the time I showed up. They had done Underworld 1, they had done Underworld 2. System Shock was well underway. So there's this sort of tortuous process of integrating myself into that creative community and getting Thief done. So were you the one? I know that Thief went through many different revisions, having talked to Tim and then Ken about it, and I know that certain things about it came together at the very end. I know at the beginning it was like a totally different concept, and it got changed many times, and somehow sword fighting stayed in it. Yes. Somehow. Yes. But I know that so you came on a bit after it started, and you did see it through, right? You were like the one who sort of was there for the rest of the way. That's right. And I guess I'm wondering, what you remember about that, or how did that go, or like how did it change? Just from your perspective as a person who just kind of came on to the project and was like captain of the ship, right? Trying to so I'm a little reluctant to commit myself because I might be wrong, and then other people say, no, that's not true at all. Yeah, well, that's why it's great. That's why we have different podcasts. And you can compare stories so we can see. So there was a massive staff turnover, right? Like Ken was the lead designer when I came on, and then pretty shortly thereafter, he left and started Irrational. There was a lead artist who quit. The lead programmer quit. Was this right after or right before you came on? This was within a few months after I came on. And so that we were scrambling like crazy. And then we got new people in each of those slots who were really good. Tom Leonard joined, who's now with Valve. You should totally talk. That would be great. Yeah. And Doug's now with Valve, too. Doug is now with Valve, that's right. Yeah, so I should probably just call them up. And so, it was a troubled project. But then there was this little brain trust. Tim was certainly instrumental. Mark LeBlanc was key. Doug, Tom Leonard, there's probably people I'm forgetting, but the concept of it being stealth focused emerged, and there was some, I think, really good conceptual design work where like that was like kind of rigorously tackled as like, okay, how would that work and what would you do, and how can we communicate the game state back to the player through the barks and so forth, which then I think we contracted Terry to write a lot of that stuff. So from a design standpoint, it was, well, the two big thrusts that I remember that were really fun and rewarding was, one was this idea that it's going to be a stealth game, and how do we do that, and building up this like formal tool set to communicate game state to the player and give them tools where you can the moss arrows that to make where there was a sound component and a visual component, all of which I thought was like really elegant and worked well. And the other was kind of a narrative philosophy that I remember pushing for that worked, which was that we would like build this entire body of knowledge about the world, like all this backstory, and there was the keepers and the all this this detailed backstory about how the world worked, but that we would never really express it. There was like very little exposition, right? It would be like you'd be walking along and you'd overhear stuff, or you'd read a letter, and that some stuff was relevant to the plot and a lot of stuff wasn't, that there was like this attempt to obfuscate the boundary between that like you never quite saw the edge of the world, that there was that we tried to like craft this like big complex world that you were moving through, but that you didn't, unlike a lot of adventure games and so forth where like you're clearly in the center of the world, everything's pointed at you, that we would try to make this world where like to try to create this illusion of a world that had its own logic and was kind of proceeding on narratively, and that you were just a little piece of it.
Yeah, one of the things that's it's interesting if you compare the first two Thief games to Thief Deadly Shadows, which was the Iron Storm one. And for the record, we already talked to Randy about this, but I like Deadly Shadows, but it's interesting that in that game they actually let you kind of explore the city as this kind of real-time area to like get to different missions. And one of the things that loses is that in the first two games, because it was mission-based, you were only ever seeing snippets, and you definitely got the impression that the world was so vast. The city, it was like, Fritz Lang's Metropolis or something. It like never ended, seemingly. Right?
Yeah.
There was just, it could just be the entire world, and you never really know.
No, there was this explicit attempt to kind of obfuscate the boundaries, and that we never named the city.
Yeah, it's just the city.
Yeah, right? It was just like this, so there was a bunch of work that went into thinking about which parts should be very detailed and which parts we should never touch, in terms of like actually explaining to you where you were, which I liked, and I thought worked.
Well, it leaves a lot of room for the player to, fill in gaps and imagine things, and it gives their imagination room to grow, right, in that kind of.
Yeah, and I think it had this effect of sort of like focusing you experientially on the stuff that we wanted you to focus on, and not getting too bound up in a way, because really it was all about you like sneaking around and knocking out guards and so forth. It wasn't necessarily so much about the story. It was about the story, but
well, that texture is there if you're the kind of player who wants it, but the game's not forcing you to sit down and listen to a lecture about it.
Yeah. Exactly. That's really the point, right? It's like it was an attempt to get away from that, like a giant scrolling thing of text, or you're standing in front of some NPC and he's like laying out all this stuff. That it would be more interesting just to absorb that in these little snippets, that you would ever hear.
Well, yeah, because I think part of the philosophy is that kind of narrative information should be in the world anyway, right? It should just be reflected in the world anyway. And if your exposition is really good, then it won't feel like exposition. It'll just be a feature of your level design or the NPC design, and the fact that people are talking about what they're doing that day, and what they're doing that day has to do with the world that they're in, because it's a unique world, and and overhearing stuff like that, it's very profound. Like the sense of that world is so thick in that game that you can't be in that world without absorbing that kind of information.
Yeah, and given that you're a thief and you're always, you're sort of an outsider and you're always in the shadows, you're playing this essentially voyeuristic role.
It's about observation.
Yes, and that was like another thing, like, and it was, I think one of the big leaps for us, which was scary, but and I'm sort of proud that we pulled off, was this idea because we were going against like Doom, and things like that, where it's like boom, boom, boom all the time, and like could we make a game where you would be entertained by like just standing for a minute someplace and doing nothing and just watching some dude, walk around a corner and like how long will it be before he comes back the other way? And then it ends up, for some people anyway, like really working as an entertainment experience. But there was not a foregone conclusion that was going to work when we started.
That's actually interesting because the year that came out, 1998. Metal Gear Solid 1 and this other stealth series, Tenchu, for the PS1 came out. And it was weird because it was like, I don't think like any of those three games sort of like had anything to do with each other in terms of influencing each other. Even though Metal Gear had been out about 10 years before on the NES in the US and in other parts of the world. It was on the MSX computer first. But it's funny because when people talk about stealth now as a genre, which of course was not coined at the time that Thief came out, I remember some people joking in interviews, and I don't remember who it was maybe Doug or somebody, talking about it as a first-person sneaker, as a variation on the FPS, abbreviation. But it's interesting though, because when we talked to Ken mentioned, he didn't mention like, oh yeah, I played the original Metal Gear Solid 10 years ago, and then was thinking about that. It was like he said he was thinking about like submarine simulations because that was like the only genre he could think of that actually was about trying to not be seen. As an inspiration. And it's interesting how today I think people see some of these games as having a common heritage, but what's really interesting is that it seems like there was like a bunch of people in different parts of the world kind of like inventing the wheel sort of at the same time.
I think so. Yeah, I don't recall. See, I was not very much of a game guy at that point, so I think I remember being aware of those games, but I certainly hadn't played them. That might not be true of the other folks on the team, So I don't remember who knew what, but certainly it wasn't like we had a lot of conversations about Metal Gear Solid or anything.
Sure,
it was like kind of in our bubble.
Well, Metal Gear Solid 1 wasn't out at that point. At that point, it was only the NES game that had come out like 10 years earlier.
Right.
I think Metal Gear Solid came out like the same month Thief did, which was really weird because it was like suddenly, oh my God, sneaking is cool. Like all of a sudden in like November, 1998.
Yeah, like it just like popped on.
Like suddenly happened, right? And that was really interesting. But one of the things that interests me about the stealth aspect of Thief is so coming from your own background as a musician and then working in sound. And one of the things that really makes Thief different from Metal Gear Solid is that Metal Gear Solid is still this kind of I like it a lot, but it's a very kind of jokey, abstract variation on a lot of the sneaking concepts, and it's still kind of like sort of like a Hollywood action movie too. So there are these big action, bombastic set pieces. But Thief is really like there's not cool parts where the game's like, okay, now it's not stealth, which Metal Gear always has those parts.
Right.
Thief is really just about like, no, really, this whole game from beginning to end, every minute is about being silent, and sound is so incredibly important. And I'm interested in the sound design of Thief too, because we're talking about now coming from music and now being at Harmonix for the past several years, and then working on the Music and System Shock and doing sound design, and then working on Thief, which is you were not in a sound designer role, but that the importance of sound in that game is so incredibly profound from a gameplay point of view. In other words, that game is, you can't play that game if you're deaf, which is kind of bad from an accessibility point of view if you're deaf. But that's also one of the really interesting things about the game is sound matters so much in that game that I just can't think of a lot of other games where that's the case, and that sound is treated so subtly and it's such an incredibly important part of the gameplay. It's not just mood and not just atmosphere.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of it's funny because now like sort of stealth is this design component that lots of games use to a greater or lesser extent, and in the I can't think of an example offhand, but
Beyond Good and Evil, for example, had stealth sort of in it, right? Lots of games have like little stealthy bits.
Yeah, or even like Oblivion.
Yeah,
sure.
Right? Yeah. You can be a thief in Oblivion, and it's a little bit. Yeah, it's got a lot of the same mechanics.
And a lot of the time, it's like in my experience with a lot of the stealth design, a lot of those games is that it never works as well because they don't make the complete commitment to it that's required for it to work as a design concept. Because you really have to know what your player state is. Like we had the little gem, the show, and then that tied very tightly to if you were partly visible, then the guards would have this sort of like, oh, I suspect something's going on set of verb barks, as opposed to like, oh, I see you and I'm going to chase you. That those levels of awareness of the NPCs were very graded to your state, and how much sound you were making, and all that was necessary for it to work. And to do it sort of as a half measure for me never really worked, because you could never really tell, like.
Are they chasing me? Do they know I'm here? Like, how close am I?
What exactly are the cues here? And it's like, how do I proceed? Whereas, for me, like one of the most satisfying aspects of Thief is you really, if you played the game in the way that it was intended to be played, you really knew, like you could formulate a plan and execute your plan, and with like complete confidence that it was going to work. Like the game never really like screwed you. There wasn't.
What you see with those guards is what you get, right? It's kind of like, if they say, where are you, and they have that exact animation that you always see when they're looking for you. And I've heard something, but I don't know where you are animation. And this is always extremely clear.
Yeah, or if you walk in the metal plate and there's a guard within proximity, that's not going to work out for you.
I remember in the first level there was this horrible part in the third floor where there's like this like marble that if you touch it, it's like you're walking on it with high heels, and they can hear it through the whole floor. And then there are these like beautiful, like almost like Persian rugs. Yeah. And you have to like leap over them.
You have to jump from rug to rug.
Jump from rug to rug, and it's like you're a little kid or something. But you're in this incredibly dangerous situation. It's one of the things I really remember from that game, where it's like, holy crap, is this floor really that loud?
I remember there was some entertaining snark, post ship about like, okay, this is a cool game, but what's up with this guy's shoes? He's like a thief, but he has like
he's wearing like tap shoes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, if you were a thief, why would you wear tap shoes? You think that
you put socks over his shoes. And, he'd be fine, kind of a thing.
Greg, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you remember? Because I'm curious, especially from a project lead perspective. Do you remember how, from the design perspective, privileging sound affected the kind of budget grab? Especially, because sound is notoriously large, right, in terms of the sound files. And so it's like one of those things where it's like artists are always trying to grab at some of the memory and the storage space for their own assets, and then sound is always, there's always this kind of perceived conflict between the departments in regards to the storage space.
I don't remember that as being it could have been I don't remember it as an explicit conflict. I remember there was some technical hurdles that were like pretty daunting, where we basically, like, the whole thing of like sound occlusion was critical, and so we had to like build into the engine, which was our own homebrew engine that Sean Barrett sort of built on his own in essence, that with our own editor, that the level designers had to do this whole parallel pass of like, you'd have a room and then you'd have to go back and do like the sound version, right? Like you'd have to like grow a cube, for the room, and then a cube for the hallway, and they were all tagged so that sound would travel through the appropriate things. And then there were all these bugs where like two sound volumes wouldn't line up, and so the sound wouldn't pass through them, and so forth. And then it was like a lot of work to implement and debug the sound propagation system that was like living in parallel with the
Tim mentioned something about that sounded interesting, that he said it was almost like an emergent feature of that system, that because of the way that the kind of sound areas were designed, that you could like if you leaned into a door, if you put your ear up to a door, you could hear what was in the room, and if you were standing outside the room, you couldn't.
Yeah, right.
Which was not like designed in a GDD somewhere, but it was just kind of like that happened. And it was like, oh, that's really cool. So that's
right, because we had these volumes, these invisible volumes that that affected the sound propagation.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I did actually want to ask, when I first played Thief, I had a Diamond Monster 2 sound card, which had this kind of true 3D. There was like these. I remember at the time there were these warring 3D standards. Like one of them was like the Creative Labs EAX, whatever it was.
That's right. Yeah.
But then the other one, which is the one I had, which was way better. It was basically. And I remember hearing. I don't know much about the actual sound technology behind it, but I remember hearing that the Creative one was kind of like a bunch of kind of cheats for 3D, where it was just some weird effect stuff with reverb or something. But then the other one, it was called A3D or Oriole 3D or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I played it. And I played it like in the dark with like these really good earphones. And I swear to God, it sounded like somebody walking behind you. Like the 3D sound was phenomenally good using that particular hardware. And I'm wondering if, like, did you, sort of like you were saying with System Shock, you had to design for all these audio standards. Like, do you remember that process at all?
I remember, well, that was all Eric. So I was sort of, involved sort of in an oversight sense, but not like really in the details. I remember committing to EAX, and my recollection of that, for what it's worth, was that the real value add there was not so much 3D directionality, but it was that they had like a digital reverb on the card that you could tag spaces with the different sizes. So if you're in the giant cavernous space, it would put up the appropriate reverb, and if you were in a little tight hallway, so that it was really ambience generation. And we did support that. I remember putting some work into that. Whereas the A3D thing or whatever it was called.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
That was this fancy algorithm that would do like phase cancellation to basically do point source localization all the way around your head. And it was very cool.
It was really cool. I mean, I have to say that I still have that card. And I've been intending to build like a Windows 98 machine just so I can have people play Thief with that card because it's real 3D sound.
Yeah.
And it really is amazing if you're playing that game with real 3D sound. I mean, you hear shit behind you, like in the room.
Yeah, it was totally cool. And then my recollection, which again, it's like Eric would remember probably better than me, was that if you supported the SDK, that you got it for free. Like it wasn't a lot of work, basically that you would just pass, directional information to it, and it would just do the calculation and just like put the sound up, Whereas EAX was like, no, you had to tag every space.
Yeah, you had to like design the whole world with it. Yeah. Cool. So one of the things that I've been asking people on the podcast too, and I think we're kind of just building up to this with talking about sound, is so you left. When did you leave to go to Harmonix?
December '98.
And that was just so that would have been like right after.
It was. I knew that I had known that I was going to leave. I think as early as August or September, because I was recruited by Alex and Iran at Harmonix at that point, and what I had told them was like, okay, but I need to see this through. And this is how long it'll take, and I think it finaled in November, I'm guessing, and then basically the day it finaled, I gave notice.
Yeah. I remember playing it in December, so that makes sense. So so you had this, I guess, so obviously Harmonix is all about sound and music. And is that something because you were coming from a musician background, and even though sound is really important in some ways, for a company that was not specifically music game oriented, sound was very important in Looking Glass games and things like it. And was that something? Did you just like want to sort of focus more on like music and sound because that was kind of like your original job, or your sort of like your kind of like passion originally?
Well, to be candid, two things. It was a great opportunity. I mean, it was like Ron and Alex were like impressive guys and very engaging, and the idea of sort of integrating sort of my musical background and the experience that I'd got at Looking Glass was appealing. I mean, it was like a new sort of uncharted territory about interactive musical experiences, because at that point Harmonix wasn't a game company. They hadn't made any games. But the real issue, quite frankly, was Thief was a death march. It was like 7-day weeks for months. Because it was do or die for the company. We had to ship for Christmas, or the company was going to go out of business. And there were a few points in development where like I would have to like fly to Eidos and do a demo, and if the demo didn't go well, we were canceled. And it was and I had like a 2-year-old, and my wife was pregnant with my second child, and I was working 7-day weeks, 12-hour days, for months on end, and I came to the conclusion that sort of the Looking Glass management, like, I went to talk to Paul Newrath, I think, what can we do about this? And nobody had any ideas about how to solve it. Like, and I wasn't senior enough or experienced enough to have any ideas myself. And so for me, it was like, I can't live this way. You know, I can't. This can. You know, this. I can't do this again. And it wasn't clear how it was going to be any different.
Yeah.
And so that was, you know, and that was it for me. And I had this other opportunity that was like very compelling.
Yeah.
So, but from a creative standpoint, I would have stayed forever. You know.
Yeah.
It was great.
It's interesting what I've heard about Thief is that it was from everybody who worked on it is that it was this like really hard project that had all these problems, and it had this kind of amazing, miraculous kind of like perfect landing, like at the very end of it, where it was just kind of like, wow, everything fell into place at the last minute, and it was a great game. And but that's definitely not the kind of thing you can plan for or would want to plan for.
No, like the risk, you know, that we were dealing with was just like incredibly high. It was very, very stressful. And no, you know, and that's one of the things I'm most proud of is like we actually pulled it off. You know, we pulled it off and shipped the game, and it ended up being a good game. But oh my God, you know, it was just in terms of staff churn and just all of us, you know, just trying to come together creatively. It was like, you know, it was a lot of strong opinions, and you know, a lot of like just it was very tumultuous. Yeah. You know, and we got it done, and we pulled together, and we made the game that we wanted to make. But it was not an easy process by any stretch.
Yeah, no, I've definitely heard that. So, one of the things I talked to Dan about is like, you know, does he miss doing some of that, you know, kind of interesting, almost kind of like, you know, narrative design, world design kind of stuff, you know, being at Harmonix? And his answer was no.
Interesting. My answer would be yes.
Okay.
I love that stuff. It was really fun to work on. And it's not the kind of thing that Harmonix would never do. You know, it's certainly, you know.
For whatever reason, you've had this momentum with these certain successful franchises.
That's right. You know, we've followed the ideas that we've had that have, you know, brought us success, and you know, and that's ongoing. But no, I love that. It was really fun.
Cool. And do you think maybe the fact that it sounds like you weren't much of a gamer before that. It sounds like, you know, you're a musician, you were in this band, and it sounds like you working in the industry was kind of like your introduction to not just making games, but just playing games also. Which was very much kind of how I felt about being at Looking Glass for pretty much my entire tenure there. Maybe less so over time, but really it was like people would have conversations about games or game concepts, and I had no idea. You know, I basically had to learn everything from. You know, I had none of this frame of reference or knowledge. You know, that's actually really interesting. I guess we're about.
Are you in here for a while?
We're basically done.
We're wrapping up.
We're wrapping.
You got the rum?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not 10 minutes then?
5-10 minutes.
Five.
Okay.
5 is fine. I think that's basically it. What year did Frequency come out? Was that before you were there?
No. That was the first thing I worked on, really.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So is that why Terry does the tutorial in it? Because I remember when I played that game for the first time.
Oh, I forgot that she.
No. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. When I played that game for the first time, I remember somebody saying, "Oh yeah, this is a Frequency. This is by some of the people who used to work at Looking Glass." I'm like, "Oh really?" And then I played the first level of the tutorial, and it's this like, you know, it's the track. It looks like the cyberspace in System Shock, and then I'm hearing like Shodan's voice, and I'm like,
wait, this is not the association.
And I'm like, what is it? And I'm like, what is this? You know. But it was funny that like in Frequency, maybe just because of the kind of like abstract, you know, techno cyberspace aesthetic of the game, and also the fact that Terry's voice is in. I remember almost thinking that's almost kind of like a handover from Looking Glass to
No, that's pretty
Harmonix.
funny. I never thought about that, but yeah, it must have been like sort of jarring to encounter Shodan.
I know.
A different game by a different company.
Yeah. I mean, it was nice Shodan.
Yeah, right.
It was like, you know, it was like pre-evil Shodan, but I was like, oh my God, why is Shodan being so nice to me? and then I realized that game is really hard. And so I was like, actually, Shodan still hates me.
Yeah, a little harder than we realized.
I love that game, by the way. In fact, I really love Frequency. It is brutally hard. But
thank you.
But it's a very good game, and I really like it a lot.
It was our first attempt, you know. We were trying to do something different, and you know,
it's great.
I think it has. By my way of thinking, it has a little bit of that Looking Glass thing. insofar as I think Looking Glass games expected a lot of the player, which has some good things and some bad things. But that was like one of the kind of like hallmarks of Looking Glass games to me is like that they held the player in pretty high estimation and expected a lot.
Yeah, and it's not
and it gave a lot.
Yeah, and gave a lot. Yeah, and it's not necessarily even player skill or motor skill of the hands, but just like even because System Shock isn't really a hard game from like a motor skill point of view, but just in terms of the information that it expects you to like really listen to all those logs. And if you compare it to later stuff like in BioShock, it's really easy in games like BioShock to parse which logs are just like world flavor and which ones have like the ones with like the key that you need to unlock the door is always like really obvious, and in System Shock it's not so obvious, so it like really forces you to engage with that world, and it makes it less of a mainstream game. But like you were saying, it demands a certain level of investment.
Yeah, which is like times have changed, and the upside is like a lot more games get sold now, and it's a much bigger market, and so we can afford to employ more people and all of that, and then it's harder to make games like that because they don't make it through playtest.
Yeah.
Like people get confused, and then you have to simplify the game.
That's it.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.